somewhere in an HOA office. A printer hummed, cold, mechanical, spitting out another violation notice with my name on it. I stood at the end of my driveway, holding that white envelope like a declaration of war. $500 fine. Failure to maintain aesthetic standards. My crime, a dark blue mailbox. The same one my father painted 35 years ago, but according to a bylaw, revised last month without notice. It now needed to be antique white. Signature at the bottom, Deborah Whitmore, HOA president. If you're dealing with your own HOA nightmare, comment where you're watching from, because this woman had no idea who she had just picked a fight with. I tucked the violation notice into my back pocket and walked toward the stable, where Whiskey, my 12-year-old quarter horse, waited for his morning feed. The ranch stretched 40 acres across the Texas Hill Country, land my grandfather bought in 1952, land my father worked until his hands looked like leather, land my mother filled with wildflowers every spring. 5 years ago, a drunk driver took them both on Highway 71. I left a promising career in the Army to come home. Some promises you make to the dying, some you make to yourself. Keeping this ranch was both. The morning routine steadied me. Hay for the horses, fresh water in the troughs, checking hooves on the 2 mares I was boarding for a client in Austin. I worked as a farrier now, shoeing horses across 3 counties. Honest work, quiet work, the kind of work that lets me think. And right now, I was thinking about that $500 fine and the woman who signed it, Deborah Whitmore. I had seen her around, always driving that white Cadillac Escalade like she owned the whole subdivision. HOA president for 6 years running, according to the neighbors, ran unopposed every election because nobody wanted the headache of dealing with her. Around 10:30, I heard tires crunching on gravel. I stepped out of the stable, wiping my hands on a rag, and there she was. The Escalade gleamed in the sunlight, parked right at my front gate like a statement. Deborah climbed out slowly, designer sunglasses pushed up on her head, clipboard in hand. She was maybe late 50s. Hair dyed that particular shade of blonde that women in certain tax brackets preferred. She smiled, but it never reached her eyes. "Mr. Cole," she called out, her voice carrying that practiced sweetness that set my teeth on edge. I wanted to personally follow up on the violation notice. Make sure there's no confusion. I walked toward the gate, keeping my pace steady. No rush, no aggression. "Mrs. Whitmore," I said, "I got the notice. I have some questions about it." She tilted her head, the way you might look at a child who asked why the sky was blue. "Questions. It's quite straightforward. Your mailbox doesn't comply with the revised community standards. Sherwin-Williams, antique white. The code is right there in the letter." I nodded slowly. "That mailbox has been dark blue for 35 years. Same as every other mailbox on this road. When exactly was this bylaw revised?" Her smile tightened. "Just a fraction. Last month, the board voted unanimously. Notices were sent. I had received no notice. I would have remembered, but I kept that card close." "I see. And the $500 fine, that's the standard penalty for a mailbox color." She stepped closer to the gate, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something expensive and aggressive. "Mr. Cole, I understand this property has sentimental value to you, but Silverbrook Estates has standards. We're not some backwater farm community anymore. There are people interested in this area, developers, good people who want to build something modern." She paused, letting that land. "If maintaining these standards becomes too burdensome for you, there are options. I know someone who would make a very generous offer on this land. You could be free of all this hassle." There it was, the real agenda, wrapped in silk and delivered with a smile. I looked at her for a long moment, then past her, at the fields where my father taught me to ride, where my mother planted those wildflowers that still bloomed every April. "I appreciate the information, Mrs. Whitmore. I'll review the bylaws and respond appropriately." She blinked, clearly expecting more resistance, something she could use. "Well, good. I hope we can resolve this amicably." She turned and walked back to her Escalade, heels clicking on the gravel. Before she climbed in, she looked back. "Do think about that offer. Mr. Cole, this land, it deserves better." The Escalade disappeared down the road, leaving dust hanging in the air. I stood there until the sound of the engine faded completely. Then I went inside. My house was modest, with 3 bedrooms, built by my grandfather and expanded by my father. On the wall hung photos of them both, and of my mother smiling in her garden. In the corner of the living room sat a gray metal filing cabinet, a relic from my previous life. 15 years in the Army, the last 8 in CID, Criminal Investigation Division. I had investigated fraud, theft, assault, and corruption. I had built cases against officers who thought their rank made them untouchable. I had learned one fundamental truth: documentation wins wars. I sat at the kitchen table with the HOA bylaws I had downloaded months ago when I first moved back, flipped to the section on exterior standards, mailbox color, consistent with community aesthetic, specific colors subject to board approval, no mention of Sherwin-Williams anything, no mention of antique white. I pulled out my laptop, navigated to the HOA website, and downloaded the current bylaws. There it was, added last month, buried in an amendment. All mailboxes must be repainted to Sherwin-Williams SW6119, antique white, within 30 days of notice. No record of any vote in the meeting minutes. No notification sent to residents, just an amendment that appeared like magic. Perfectly timed to target anyone the board wanted to pressure. I opened the filing cabinet, pulled out a fresh manila folder, and wrote on the tab, Whitmore, HOA. Inside, I placed the violation notice, a printout of the old bylaws, a printout of the new bylaws, and a page of handwritten notes with today's date. Then I picked up my phone and called Elena Vasquez, the nurse who lived 2 properties down. "Elena, it's Marcus. Did you get a visit from Deborah Whitmore today?" Her sigh told me everything. $300, she said, for parking my own car in my own driveway. Apparently, it was too visible from the street. How long has this been going on? 2 years. She's done it to half the neighborhood. Anyone who doesn't kiss her ring. I looked at the folder on my table. Elena, start writing everything down. Dates, times, what she said, what she did, everything. Silence. Then, quietly, "You think it'll matter?" "I know it will." That night, I sat on the porch with a beer, watching the stars come out over the pasture. My phone buzzed. Delivery notification from the Farrier Supply Company. "The package is arriving tomorrow." I made a mental note to grab it early. But when I checked the porch the next morning, there was nothing there. The tracking said delivered at 7:42 a.m. By the time I walked out at 8:15, the package was gone. I checked the security camera footage. The angle was wrong, only catching the edge of the driveway, but I saw something, a flash of white, a vehicle, moving slowly. I replayed it 3 times, then wrote in my notebook, "Package missing, white vehicle, possible Escalade, 7:42 a.m. delivery, 8:15 a.m. discovery, footage inconclusive." The first package was worth about $90, replaceable, forgettable, but I had spent 15 years learning that small crimes were never small. They were patterns waiting to be recognized, and patterns, once recognized, could be proven. The second package disappeared 4 days later. Veterinary supplements for the horses, about $180 worth of joint medicine that I ordered every 3 months. Tracking showed delivery at 8:23 a.m. By the time I finished morning chores and walked to the gate, nothing. I filed a report with the shipping company. Got the same response as before: proof of delivery exists. Anything after that is your responsibility. I called the county sheriff's office and requested someone come out. They sent Deputy Tommy Rayburn, a man I had known since our Army days. We had served in the same unit for 2 years before I transferred to CID, and he got out to join law enforcement back home. Good man. Steady. But when he stepped out of his cruiser that afternoon, something in his posture told me this visit would not go the way I hoped. Tommy walked the property with me, looked at the spot where packages were left, and nodded at all the right moments, but his eyes kept drifting, like he was calculating something in his head. "Marcus, I want to help you," he said finally, pulling off his hat to wipe his forehead. "But I need something concrete. Footage with a face, a license plate, something I can take to the DA. I showed him the camera footage, the flash of a white vehicle barely visible at the edge of the frame. He watched it twice, then shook his head. That could be anyone. It could be a delivery truck turning around. Could be a neighbor. I kept my voice level. 3 packages in 2 weeks. Tommy, all delivered, all gone within an hour. That's not a coincidence." He looked at me for a long moment, then lowered his voice. "Look, I'm not supposed to say anything, but you should know the situation is complicated. My wife just started working for Harold Whitmore's construction company. Good job, good benefits, and Harold's wife." He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. I understood perfectly. The Whitmores had their fingers in enough pies that even a deputy had to think twice before making waves. I ordered a new security camera that night. Higher resolution, wider angle, motion activated with cloud backup. If someone was going to keep taking my property, I would make sure the next time left no room for doubt. The camera arrived 3 days later, and I installed it myself, positioning it to cover the entire driveway and gate area. That same week, the HOA announced an emergency community meeting. Topic: rising security concerns in Silverbrook Estates. I knew exactly what that meant, but I went anyway. You learn more about your enemies by watching them perform than by avoiding them. The community center was packed that Thursday evening. Maybe 40 residents, most of them faces I recognized from around the neighborhood. Elena sat near the back, saving me a seat. I slid in next to her, just as Deborah Whitmore took the podium, her husband Harold positioned in the front row like a loyal soldier. Deborah wore a cream-colored blazer and pearls. Every inch, the concerned community leader. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice carrying that practiced warmth. "As many of you know, we've seen a troubling increase in property crimes in our area. Packages are going missing, suspicious vehicles. It's deeply concerning." She paused, letting her gaze drift across the room until it landed on me. "Some of us believe that certain properties in our community may be attracting unwanted elements, properties that don't maintain our standards, properties that, frankly, lower the tone of the entire neighborhood." The implication was clear. Several heads turned in my direction. I kept my expression neutral, my hands relaxed on my knees. Elena's jaw tightened beside me. Deborah continued, her voice taking on a regretful tone. "I've spoken with developers who are very interested in revitalizing our community, bringing in modern homes, families who share our values, but they're hesitant because they see properties that look like they belong in a different era, a different class of neighborhood." Harold nodded from the front row. "Right on cue." I raised my hand. Deborah's smile flickered, but held. "Mr. Cole, did you have a question?" I stood slowly, making sure my voice carried to every corner of the room. "Mrs. Whitmore, you mentioned property crimes, package thefts. Do you have any evidence connecting these thefts to specific properties? Any police reports? Any investigation findings?" The room went quiet. Deborah's fingers tightened on the podium. "Well, I'm not a police officer. Mr. Cole, I'm simply sharing concerns that many residents have expressed." "Concerns," I repeated, "not evidence." Silence stretched between us. Randy Foster, one of the board members, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, staring at the floor. Finally, Deborah forced another smile. "I think we all want the same thing. A safe, beautiful community. Let's focus on solutions, not accusations." She moved on to other business, but the damage was done. She had planted her seed, painted her target, Now it was just a matter of time before she made her next move. After the meeting, Elena and I stood in the parking lot under the yellow glow of the streetlights. "She's trying to run you out," Elena said, her voice tight with anger. "It's what she does. Find someone she doesn't like. Make their life miserable until they leave." I nodded. "How long has she been doing this to you?" Elena laughed bitterly. 2 years. Started when I complained about her dog running loose in my yard. Next thing I know, I'm getting fined for everything. My car was parked wrong. My trash cans are visible on the wrong day. Last month, she told people at church that I was a bad influence. My son Danny came home from school crying because kids were saying his mom was a troublemaker. Her voice cracked on that last word. I thought about Danny, 8 years old, bright-eyed, the kind of kid who loved coming to the ranch to see the horses. The idea of him being hurt because of Deborah's petty vendetta made something cold settle in my chest. "Elena," I said quietly, "that notebook I gave you, have you been using it?" She nodded. "Every day, dates, times, everything she says or does." "Good. Keep going. And if you hear about anyone else she's targeted, let me know." And the 4th package went missing on a Tuesday morning. Leather working tools for my farrier kit, about $320. But this time, my new camera caught something useful. 9:23 a.m. A white Cadillac Escalade was rolling slowly past my gate, stopping just out of frame of the old camera angle, a figure stepping out. The new camera caught the edge of the vehicle, the license plate partially visible, and a shape moving toward the porch, not clear enough for a face, but clear enough for a pattern. I pulled up vehicle registration records through a public database, cross-referenced the partial plate with white Escalades registered in the county. 3 results. 1 belonged to Harold Whitmore. I sat at my kitchen table, notebook open, and wrote down everything. Times, dates, amounts, footage, timestamps. 4 packages now, totaling over $600. I was building something, not ready yet, but taking shape. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was simple. "Sell while you can. That ranch doesn't belong to people like you." I took a screenshot, saved it to my evidence folder, and wrote the time in my notebook. Then I typed a reply and deleted it. Some battles you win by waiting. Some traps you set by staying silent. The 5th anniversary of my parents' death fell on a Wednesday. I drove to the small cemetery on the edge of town before sunrise, carrying wildflowers I had picked from the field behind the stable, the same field where my mother used to walk every morning, coffee in hand, planning which colors to plant next season. I knelt between their headstones, arranged the flowers in the simple vases I had installed years ago, and stayed there as the sun crept over the hills. I did not pray, exactly. I talked, told them about the horses, about the ranch, about the work I was doing to keep everything the way they left it. I did not mention the HOA, or the missing packages, or the woman who seemed determined to push me off land that had been in our family for 3 generations. Some burdens you carry alone. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Finally, I pulled it out and saw an email notification from Silverbrook Estates HOA. The subject line made my stomach drop. Notice of lien proceeding. Unpaid assessments. Immediate action required. I opened the attachment right there, kneeling in the cemetery grass. $2,400 in accumulated fines. Violations for the mailbox, for the visible agricultural equipment, for the non-compliant fence posts, for a dozen other infractions I had never been properly notified about. And, at the bottom, the threat that made everything else irrelevant. Failure to remit payment within 60 days will result in the placement of a lien on your property. Continued non-compliance may result in forced sale to recover outstanding assessments. They were not just harassing me anymore. They were coming for my home. I drove straight to the county clerk's office and requested copies of all HOA filings related to my property. The clerk, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, printed out a stack of documents and handed them over without comment. I sat in my truck in the parking lot and read every page. Deborah had filed the lien paperwork 3 days ago. The signatures were all there. Randy Foster, 2 other board members I barely knew, everyone, falling in line behind her. The process was technically legal. That was the worst part. She was using the system exactly as it was designed, weaponizing bureaucracy against anyone who refused to bend. I had seen this before, during my years in CID. Corrupt officers who knew the regulations better than anyone, who could bury you in paperwork while keeping their hands technically clean. Deborah Whitmore was not stupid. She was something worse. She was patient. I found Tommy Rayburn at the sheriff's station that afternoon, finishing paperwork at his desk. He looked up when I walked in, and I saw the conflict in his eyes before he even spoke. "Marcus, what can I do for you?" I kept my voice low, aware of the other deputies in the room. "I need to talk, privately." He hesitated, then nodded and led me to an empty interview room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I laid out the situation. The packages, the fines, the lien. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Tommy listened without interrupting, his expression growing more troubled with every detail. When I finished, he rubbed his face with both hands and let out a long breath. "Marcus, I believe you, I do, but what you're describing, it's civil. The lien, the fines, that's all HOA business, even if she's being vindictive. There's no law against being vindictive." I leaned forward. "The packages, Tommy, that's theft, criminal theft, multiple counts." He nodded slowly. "You're right, but I need evidence, real evidence. A face on camera, a witness, something that puts her at the scene with the package in her hands." I thought about the footage I had, the white Escalade, the partial plate, the figure at the edge of the frame, close, but not close enough. "What if I told you I'm working on that?" Tommy looked at me for a long moment, then glanced at the door. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't tell you this, but you should know that Deborah Whitmore has been making complaints about you to the sheriff personally, saying you're unstable, that you've been threatening her. She's laying groundwork. Marcus, if anything happens, anything at all, she wants to make sure you look like the aggressor." The information settled into my chest like a cold stone. She was not just attacking my property. She was attacking my reputation, my credibility, my ability to defend myself. "One more thing," Tommy added, standing up. "If you're going to do something, do it clean. By the book. Because people like her, they don't lose fair fights. They only lose when they beat themselves." That evening, Elena called me, and I knew from her voice that something was wrong. "Can you come over? Please." I found her sitting on her front porch, eyes red, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. Danny was inside, she said, in his room, refusing to come out. "What happened?" She took a shaky breath. "Kids at school, they've been saying things, that I'm a bad person, that I'm ruining the neighborhood. One of them told Danny that his mom should go back to where she came from." Her voice broke on the last words. "He's 8 years old, Marcus. He doesn't understand why people are being mean to him." I sat down beside her, feeling a rage build in my chest that I had not felt in years. "Did he say where the kids heard this?" Elena nodded. "Parent talk. One of the mothers is friends with Deborah. They were at some church function together, and Deborah was talking about problem residents and how they were bringing down the community. She named me specifically, and apparently, she's been talking about you too." I went inside to see Danny. He was sitting on his bed, knees pulled up to his chest, staring at the wall. When I knocked on the open door, he looked up with eyes that were too old for his face. "Hey, buddy," I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Your mom told me you had a rough day." He shrugged, the way kids do when they are trying to be brave. "It's okay, Mr. Marcus. I'm fine." I shook my head. "No, it's not okay, and you don't have to pretend it is. What those kids said, what that woman is doing, it's wrong. None of it is true, and none of it is your fault or your mom's fault." He looked at me, and I saw the question forming before he asked it. Then why is she doing it? I did not have an easy answer. I thought about power, about fear, about people who needed to feel important by making others feel small. "Some people think they can take whatever they want," I said finally. "They think if they're loud enough, mean enough, everyone will just get out of their way. But here's the thing, Danny, they're wrong. And sooner or later, they find out they're wrong." That night, I started making calls. Quiet calls to neighbors I knew. People who had lived in Silverbrook Estates long enough to have their own stories. The results confirmed what I suspected. Mr. Patterson, an 80-year-old widower on a fixed income, had packages of heart medication go missing 3 times in the past 6 months. He nearly ended up in the hospital when his prescription ran out, and he could not afford the pharmacy prices. The Hendersons, a young couple with a newborn, lost $500 worth of baby supplies. The Nguyen's, who ran a small online business, had customer orders vanish so often they started using a P.O. box 20 miles away. Every single one of them had, at some point, crossed Deborah Whitmore, a noise complaint, a vote against one of her proposals, a failure to contribute to her preferred charity, and every single one of them had paid the price. I wrote down their names, their losses, and their willingness to speak. By midnight, I had a list of 6 families, 6 potential witnesses, 6 people who had been too afraid or too exhausted to fight back on their own. I sat in the dark living room, the folder on my lap growing thicker by the day. On the wall, my parents looked down at me from their wedding photo, young and hopeful, and completely unaware of the battles their son would one day fight on their behalf. "I'm not just going to defend this place," I said quietly, "to no one and everyone. I'm going to win." The knock came at 6 in the morning, not the polite knock of a neighbor or the familiar rhythm of a delivery driver. This was official. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the house like gunshots. I was already awake, had been since 4, lying in bed staring at the ceiling and running through scenarios in my head. I pulled on jeans and a shirt and opened the door to find a young man in a polo shirt, clipboard in hand, face carefully neutral. "Marcus Cole." I nodded. He thrust a thick envelope into my hands. "You've been served." Then he turned and walked back to his car, without another word, leaving me standing in my doorway, holding the weight of everything Deborah Whitmore had been building toward. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope with steady hands. The document inside was 43 pages long, dense with legal language and official stamps. Silverbrook Estates, Homeowners Association versus Marcus Cole, cause of action recovery of unpaid assessments, enforcement of community standards, and petition for forced sale of property to satisfy outstanding obligations. I read every page, every paragraph, every carefully constructed sentence designed to bury me under the appearance of legitimacy. The violations were listed in excruciating detail: mailbox non-compliance, visible agricultural equipment, fence posts outside approved specifications, failure to maintain lawn height standards, unauthorized exterior paint colors. Each one came with a fine, and each fine came with late fees, and each late fee came with additional penalties. The total had ballooned to over $4,000. And at the heart of the lawsuit was the request that made my hands finally shake, not with fear, but with a fury I had spent weeks keeping contained. Petitioner respectfully requests the court authorize the forced sale of the defendant's property to recover outstanding assessments and protect the community's collective investment. They wanted to take my home, the home my grandfather built, the home my father expanded with his own hands, the home where my mother planted wildflowers every spring until the day she died. Deborah Whitmore wanted to rip it away from me and hand it over to her developer friends for a fraction of its worth, and she had constructed a paper trail so thorough that any judge would see a responsible HOA simply enforcing its rules against a delinquent homeowner. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the land that had been in my family for 3 generations. The stable where Whiskey waited for his morning feed. The pasture where the mares grazed in the early light. The wildflower field that still bloomed every April. Stubborn and beautiful, just like my mother. For a moment, I let myself imagine walking away, selling the place, taking the money, starting over somewhere Deborah Whitmore could never reach. It would be easier, quieter, safer. The thought lasted about 3 seconds. Then I went back to the table and started reading the lawsuit again, this time with a pen in my hand, marking every claim, every date, every assertion that I knew to be false or misleading. I called Sarah Mitchell at 9 o'clock. She was an attorney in the county seat, recommended by a friend who had dealt with a property dispute years ago. No nonsense, no false promises, just straight talk and solid work. I had spoken with her briefly after the lien notice, and she had told me to document everything and wait for the other side to make a move. Well, they had made their move. "I'm looking at it now," she said, her voice calm and analytical. "They've built a comprehensive case, every fine documented, every violation photographed, every procedural box checked." She paused. "On paper, this looks legitimate." I kept my voice level. "It's not legitimate. Half these violations were never properly noticed. The bylaw changes were pushed through without the required member votes. And the fines are punitive, designed to accumulate faster than anyone could reasonably pay." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Can you prove that?" "I have documentation, copies of the old bylaws, timestamps on the new ones, and records of what notices I received and when. I have neighbors who experienced the same pattern of targeted harassment." "That helps," she said, "but it's defensive. It explains why you didn't pay, but it doesn't change the fundamental dynamic. You're still reacting to their moves." I looked at the folder on my table, thick with notes and printouts and photographs. What if I could prove something else? What if I could prove that the HOA president has been committing crimes? Theft, specifically. Multiple counts. The line went silent. When Sarah spoke again, her voice had changed, sharpened with interest. "Tell me more." I told her about the packages, the pattern, the white Escalade, the partial footage, the other victims I had identified. The text message threatening me came from an unknown number. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she let out a long breath. "If you can prove theft, everything changes. Criminal conduct by HOA leadership opens them up to countersuits. Breach of fiduciary duty, malicious prosecution, conspiracy to deprive property rights. The whole lawsuit becomes evidence of a coordinated harassment campaign." She paused. "But you need proof, real proof, something that puts her at your property, taking your package, with no room for reasonable doubt." I looked out the window at my driveway, at the camera I had installed, at the spot where every package had been left, and every package had disappeared. "I'm working on that." That night, I opened the gray filing cabinet for the first time in years. Not the active folder where I had been keeping HOA documents, but the old files from my CID days. Case reports, interview transcripts, evidence logs, chain of custody forms. I had spent 15 years learning how to build cases against people who thought they were untouchable, colonels who skimmed funds, sergeants who abused their authority, officers who believed their rank placed them above the law. Every single one of them had made the same mistake. They got comfortable. They got careless. They assumed that their position would protect them forever. Deborah Whitmore was no different. She had been doing this for years, targeting anyone who crossed her, using her HOA position as a weapon. And because nobody had ever fought back effectively, she had grown confident, arrogant, sloppy. I pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Not emotions, not grievances. Strategy. Step 1. Create an irresistible target. Step 2. Ensure complete documentation of the theft. Step 3. Establish a clear chain of custody for all evidence. Step 4. Coordinate with witnesses for corroborating testimony. Step 5. Present findings to law enforcement with enough evidence to compel action. The next morning, I drove to the farm supply store in town and purchased a 5-pound bag of livestock marking powder, bright blue, non-toxic, used for identifying animals in large herds. I had used it 100 times over the years, never imagining it would serve this purpose. At the hardware store, I bought a spring-loaded mechanism designed for pest control, the kind that triggered when weight was applied or removed. Back at the ranch, I spent 3 hours in my workshop constructing what I needed: a box, roughly the size and weight of a typical delivery package. Inside, a platform connected to the spring mechanism. A container of blue powder was positioned to release upward when the platform shifted. A seal that looked factory perfect, but would give way the moment someone lifted the lid. I tested it twice, adjusting the tension, the powder volume, the angle of release. Both times, it worked flawlessly. A cloud of blue that would mark anyone within 3 feet, clinging to skin and clothes, impossible to wash off for days. I set the package at my front gate that evening, positioned exactly where every other delivery had been left. The camera was active, recording in high definition to a cloud server that Deborah Whitmore did not know existed. I sat on my porch as the sun went down, watching the light fade over the pasture, and felt something I had not felt in weeks. Not anger, not fear, certainty. If she came, I would have her. If she did not come, I would wait. I had learned patience in places far more dangerous than this. I could wait as long as it took. The stars came out one by one, and I stayed on the porch until midnight, listening to the horses shift in the stable and the crickets sing in the grass. Tomorrow would come, and when it did, I would be ready. The alert came at 10:17 in the morning. I was at a client's property 20 minutes away, finishing up a shoeing job on a Tennessee Walker with temperament issues. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I saw the notification from my security system: motion detected at the front gate. I excused myself, stepped away from the horse, and opened the live feed. The image was crystal clear, 4K resolution, perfect lighting, no shadows or obstructions. A white Cadillac Escalade sat at the edge of my driveway, engine still running, and walking toward my front gate, looking left and right like a shoplifter in a department store, was Deborah Whitmore. She wore beige slacks and a floral blouse, her hair freshly styled, her posture radiating the confidence of someone who had done this many times before, without consequence. I watched her approach the package, watched her glance around one more time, watched her bend down and pick it up with the casual ease of ownership. Then she lifted the lid. The cloud of blue ebamite erupted upward like a small explosion, engulfing her face and chest in a burst of bright pigment. Her scream came through the phone speaker, tinny but unmistakable, a sound of pure shock and outrage. She stumbled backward, dropping the package, clawing at her face with both hands. The powder clung to everything: her skin, her hair, her expensive blouse, turning her into a blue-streaked nightmare. For a moment, she just stood there, frozen, processing what had happened. Then she ran. Not walked, ran. Back to her Escalade, fumbling with the door, leaving blue handprints on the white paint. The engine roared, and the vehicle tore out of frame, tires kicking up gravel. I replayed the footage 3 times, watching every detail, confirming every angle. Her face was visible. Her license plate was visible. Her actions were unambiguous. She had come to my property. She had taken my package. She had triggered a non-toxic deterrent designed to mark thieves. Every element was documented, time-stamped, and automatically uploaded to a secure cloud server. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I finished the shoveling job, collected my payment, and drove home at the speed limit. There would be time for satisfaction later. Right now, there was work to do. Back at the ranch, I downloaded the footage to 3 separate locations: my laptop, an external hard drive, and a second cloud service. I printed screenshots with timestamps and metadata. I wrote a detailed entry in my notebook documenting the time of the incident, the sequence of events, and the evidence preserved. Then I called Sarah Mitchell. "It happened," I said. "I have her on video, clear as day." Sarah's voice was sharp with focus. "Tell me exactly what you have." I walked her through the footage, the angles, the resolution, the timestamp verification. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Marcus, this is good. This is very good. But you need to be prepared for what comes next." What came next arrived 2 hours later in the form of 2 sheriff's deputies at my front door. One of them was Tommy Rayburn, his expression carefully neutral. The other was a younger deputy I did not recognize, hand resting on his belt like he expected trouble. "Mr. Cole," the younger one said, "we've received a complaint. Deborah Whitmore alleges that you assaulted her with a chemical substance this morning." I kept my voice calm, my posture relaxed. "Deputies, I appreciate you coming out. I think you'll want to see what actually happened." I invited them inside, led them to my laptop, and played the footage from the beginning. We watched together as Deborah arrived, looked around, picked up the package, opened it, and received exactly what she deserved. The younger deputy's eyebrows rose steadily throughout. Tommy's expression did not change, but I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of vindication he was trying to suppress. When the video ended, I explained the situation. "That package was on my property. She had no permission to take it. The substance is non-toxic livestock marking powder, the same stuff ranchers use across Texas every day. I have receipts for purchase, documentation of how the device was constructed, and records showing this is the 5th package that has gone missing from my gate in the past 2 months. I pulled out my folder, thick with notes and printouts. I also have evidence that Mrs. Whitmore's vehicle was present during previous thefts, and I have identified 6 other households in the neighborhood who have experienced similar patterns of package disappearance, all of them people who had conflicts with Mrs. Whitmore or the HOA. The younger deputy looked at Tommy, uncertain how to proceed. Tommy stepped forward, his voice official, but not unkind. "Mr. Cole, based on what you've shown us, it appears Mrs. Whitmore may have committed theft. We'll need copies of this footage and your documentation for our report." I nodded and handed over a USB drive I had prepared. "Everything's on there. Chain of custody documented." After the deputies left, I started making calls. Mr. Patterson answered on the second ring, his voice frail but alert. When I told him what had happened, he let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You got her. You actually got her." I told him I had evidence that the sheriff's office was involved, that there would likely be charges. "Mr. Patterson, I need to know if you're willing to make a formal statement about your missing packages. Your testimony could help establish a pattern." He did not hesitate. "Son, I've been waiting years for someone to stand up to that woman. You tell me where to sign." Elena's reaction was similar, a rush of relief and disbelief that someone had finally caught Deborah in the act. She agreed immediately to provide a statement and to testify if needed. The Hendersons said yes. The Nguyens said yes. By evening, I had 6 witnesses ready to corroborate a pattern of targeted theft spanning more than 2 years. Sarah Mitchell called back at 8 o'clock, her voice carrying an energy I had not heard before. "Marcus, I've reviewed everything you sent. This changes the entire landscape." She walked me through the legal implications: criminal theft charges, potentially multiple counts, filing a false police report when Deborah claimed assault, and most importantly, grounds for a countersuit against both Deborah personally and the HOA as an organization. "We can argue that the lawsuit against you, the fines, the lien, all of it was part of a coordinated harassment campaign designed to force you off your property. That's a conspiracy. That's a breach of fiduciary duty. That's malicious prosecution." She paused. "This isn't just defense anymore. Marcus, this is an offense." I stood at my window, looking out at the land my family had held for 3 generations. The pasture glowed in the fading light, and somewhere in the stable, whiskey whinnied softly. "What's the next step?" I asked. Sarah's answer was immediate. "HOA meeting next week. I've already checked. Deborah will be there trying to control the narrative. So will we." That night, I received a text from an unknown number, different from the one that had threatened me before. "Drop this. You don't know who you're dealing with." I screenshot the message, saved it to my evidence folder, and typed a reply. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. See you at the meeting." For the first time in months, I slept well. The community center parking lot was already full when Sarah, Mitchell, and I arrived. Word had spread through Silverbrook Estates like wildfire, the way it always does in small communities, where everyone knows everyone else's business. The official agenda called this an emergency HOA meeting to address security concerns and community safety, but everyone knew what it was really about. They had seen Deborah Whitmore at the grocery store 3 days ago, her face still stained with patches of blue that no amount of scrubbing could remove. They had heard the rumors, watched the sheriff's cruiser parked outside her house, and noticed the way Harold Whitmore avoided eye contact at the gas station. Something had happened, and tonight they would find out what. I carried a leather briefcase containing everything I needed, printouts of the footage, time-stamped and authenticated, statements from 6 witnesses, documentation of every fine, every violation, every procedural irregularity I had uncovered. Sarah walked beside me, calm and focused, her presence a reminder that I was no longer fighting alone. The meeting room was packed beyond capacity. Folding chairs lined the walls, and people stood 3 deep at the back. I saw Elena near the front, Danny beside her, the boy's eyes finding mine and offering a small, nervous smile. Mr. Patterson sat in the second row, his weathered hands clasped in his lap, looking like a man who had waited a very long time for this moment. The Hendersons were there, and the Nguyen's, and a dozen other faces I recognized from my quiet investigation. They had all come to see what would happen. They had all come to see if justice was possible. At the front of the room, behind a table draped with the HOA banner, sat the board. Randy Foster looked like he had not slept in days, his eyes darting around the room, never settling anywhere for long. The 2 other board members flanked him, their expressions tight with barely concealed anxiety. And at the center, standing at the podium like a queen addressing her subjects, was Deborah Whitmore. She had done her best to cover the damage. Heavy foundation, carefully applied concealer, a high-collared blouse that hid the worst of the staining on her neck. But nothing could completely mask the blue tint around her hairline, the faint discoloration at the edges of her jaw. She looked like a woman who had been marked, and everyone in the room knew it. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the same practiced authority as always, but there was something brittle underneath it now, a crack in the foundation that had not been there before. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, gripping the podium with both hands. "As many of you are aware, there has been an incident, a violent, unprovoked attack on a member of this board, on me personally, by a resident who has consistently refused to comply with our community standards." She paused, letting her gaze sweep the room until it landed on me. "Marcus Cole has demonstrated that he is a danger to this community. Tonight, I am asking the board to vote on immediate enforcement of all outstanding violations and to accelerate legal proceedings to remove this threat from our neighborhood." The room stirred with murmurs. Some people nodded along with Deborah's words, the loyal supporters who had never questioned her authority, but others exchanged glances, skeptical, uncertain, waiting to hear another side. Sarah Mitchell rose from her seat, her voice cutting through the noise with professional precision. "Point of order, Madam President. Before any vote is taken, affected parties have the right to present evidence relevant to the matter at hand. My client has evidence directly pertinent to these proceedings." Deborah's smile tightened. "This is not a courtroom. Ms. Mitchell, this is a community meeting." Sarah did not back down. The HOA bylaws, Section 4, Paragraph 7, state that any member facing disciplinary action may present a defense before the board. Mr. Cole is facing disciplinary action. He has the right to speak. The room went quiet. Randy Foster looked down at the table, then at Deborah, then at me. Finally, he cleared his throat. She's right. Deborah, the bylaws are clear. For a moment, Deborah's mask slipped, revealing something cold and furious beneath. Then she forced another smile and gestured toward the front of the room. Very well, Mr. Cole, you have 5 minutes. I stood and walked to the front, carrying my briefcase. I did not rush. I did not show anger. I had learned long ago that the most powerful statements are made calmly, with evidence instead of emotion. Thank you, I said, setting up a small projector I had brought with me. I'll try to be brief. The screen flickered to life, and there it was, 4K footage, perfectly framed, showing Deborah Whitmore's Escalade pulling up to my gate. The room went silent as they watched her step out, look around, and approach the package. The tension built as she bent down, picked it up, and lifted the lid. And then the blue cloud erupted, and Deborah stumbled backward, screaming. Her face transformed into exactly what everyone in this room had seen 3 days ago. Someone gasped. Someone laughed, quickly stifled. Deborah stood frozen at the podium, her carefully constructed narrative collapsing in real time. I paused the video. This footage was recorded 4 days ago on my property. It shows Mrs. Whitmore taking a package that did not belong to her. This was not the first time. I clicked to the next slide, a timeline I had constructed over weeks of documentation. Over the past 3 months, 5 packages have been stolen from my property. Each theft occurred within hours of delivery, and in 4 of those instances, a white Cadillac Escalade was observed in the vicinity. I showed the partial footage from earlier incidents, and the pattern was emerging clearly. But I'm not the only victim. One by one, I introduced the testimonies. Mr. Patterson's heart medication. 3 shipments were stolen, nearly resulting in a medical emergency. The Hendersons' baby supplies. $500 gone. The Nguyen's business inventory forced them to relocate their shipping address 20 miles away. Elena's packages, taken during the same period she was being targeted with frivolous fines. Each name, each story, each documented loss added weight to the pattern. The room's mood shifted with every revelation. Anger building, directed not at me, but at the woman still standing at the podium. Deborah tried to interrupt. This is absurd. He's making all of this up. That video could be faked. Those witnesses could be lying. Her voice rose with each word, the composure cracking. The real Deborah emerging from behind the mask. I remained calm. Mrs. Whitmore, the footage has been authenticated by a digital forensics expert. The metadata is intact, the timestamps verified, and every witness I've named is prepared to testify under oath. I turned to face the room. But there's one more thing everyone should know. I clicked to the final slide. 3 weeks ago, the HOA filed a lawsuit against me, seeking forced sale of my property to recover alleged unpaid fines. Fines for violations that were never properly noticed, based on bylaws that were changed without required member votes. I let that sink in. At the same time, Mrs. Whitmore's husband, Harold, has been in discussions with a development company interested in purchasing land in this area. My land specifically. The room erupted. Deborah slammed her hand on the podium. That's a lie. Harold's business has nothing to do with this. But her voice was drowned out by the noise, by the questions, by the anger of people who were finally seeing the full picture. Randy Foster stood up, his face pale. I want to say something. The room quieted. He looked at Deborah, then at the audience, then at me. I knew, not everything, but I knew something was wrong. She told us if we pressured certain homeowners, they'd sell cheap and we could bring in developers. She said it would raise all our property values. He swallowed hard. I went along with it because I was scared of her. because I didn't want to be her next target. But this is wrong. It's been wrong from the beginning, and I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." He turned to Deborah. "I resigned from the board, and I'll testify to everything I know." The room was in chaos now. People shouting, demanding answers. Years of accumulated resentment finally finding a target. And then the door opened, and Deputy Tommy Rayburn walked in, uniform pressed, expression serious, followed by 2 other officers. The noise died as everyone turned to watch. Tommy walked straight to the front of the room, straight to Deborah, who had gone pale beneath her layers of concealer. "Deborah Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying to every corner. "You're being detained for questioning regarding multiple counts of theft and filing a false police report. Please come with us." For a moment, she did not move. Then something broke, and she screamed. "You can't do this. Do you know who my husband is? Do you know who I am?" Tommy's voice was flat. "Yes, ma'am. I know exactly who you are. That's why I'm doing this." They led her out, her protests echoing down the hallway until the door closed, and silence fell over the room. I stood at the front, looking at the faces of my neighbors, people who had been afraid for years, who had been bullied and fined and threatened into silence. Elena was crying quietly, and Danny pressed against her side. Mr. Patterson had his eyes closed, lip a-moving in what might have been a prayer. The Hendersons held hands. The Nguyens nodded slowly, and somewhere in the back, I heard someone start to clap. It spread slowly at first, then faster, until the whole room was applauding. Not for me exactly, but for the idea that sometimes, if you document everything and refuse to give up, the system actually works. The county courthouse stood at the center of town, like a monument to the idea that rules still mattered. 6 weeks had passed since the HOA meeting. 6 weeks of depositions and discovery and legal maneuvering that had stripped away every layer of Deborah Whitmore's carefully constructed facade. I arrived early on the morning of the trial, wearing the same suit I had worn to my parents' funeral 5 years ago. Sarah Mitchell met me at the entrance, her briefcase heavy with documents we had spent months preparing. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. I had been ready for this moment since the day that first violation notice arrived in my mailbox. Today, one way or another, it would end. The courtroom filled quickly. Mr. Patterson sat in the front row, his Sunday best pressed and clean. A man who had driven 30 miles on roads his eyesight barely allowed him to navigate anymore because he refused to miss this. Elena sat beside him, Danny at school, but her phone was ready to call him the moment there was news. The Hendersons, the Nguyens, the other families who had suffered in silence for years, all of them present, all of them waiting. On the other side of the aisle, Harold Whitmore sat alone, his expensive suit unable to hide the defeat in his posture. He had not looked at anyone since entering the room. His attorney had advised him to distance himself from his wife's actions, to cooperate with investigators, to salvage what he could from the wreckage. The development deal was dead. His reputation was shattered, and the woman he had enabled for years was about to face the consequences he had always assumed would never come. Deborah entered through a side door, escorted by a bailiff. She had lost weight in the weeks since her arrest, her face gaunt beneath makeup that no longer hid the shadows under her eyes. The blue dye was finally gone, but something else had taken its place, a hollowness that came from watching everything you built collapse around you. She did not look at the gallery. She did not look at her husband. She sat at the defense table and stared straight ahead, as if refusing to acknowledge reality might somehow change it. Judge Patricia Coleman took the bench at 9 o'clock exactly, her reputation for fairness matched only by her reputation for intolerance of nonsense. She had been a public defender before becoming a judge, had spent years fighting for people who could not afford to fight for themselves. The irony of her presiding over this case was not lost on anyone. The prosecution laid out its case with methodical precision. District Attorney James Morton walked the jury through 7 counts of theft, 1 count of filing a false police report, and evidence of a coordinated harassment campaign spanning more than 2 years. My footage played on the courtroom screens. Deborah's face clearly visible. Her actions unambiguous. The digital forensics expert confirmed the authenticity of every frame. Then came the witnesses. Mr. Patterson took the stand first, his voice trembling but clear as he described the heart medication that went missing 3 times. The pharmacy bills he could barely afford. The fear of what might happen if his prescriptions disappeared again. The Hendersons spoke about the baby supplies, the stress of new parenthood, compounded by the violation of their home. The Nguyen's explained how they had been forced to restructure their entire business because they could no longer trust packages to arrive safely. Each testimony added weight to the pattern. Each story, another brick in the wall we were building around Deborah Whitmore. Randy Foster took the stand in the afternoon. His resignation from the HOA board, now a matter of public record. He spoke quietly, avoiding Deborah's gaze, describing the meetings where she had outlined her strategy for pressuring certain homeowners to sell. She said it was for the good of the community, he testified. She said property values would go up if we could bring in the right kind of development. She never said we were breaking the law, but I knew something was wrong. I should have spoken up sooner. The defense tried to paint him as a disgruntled former colleague seeking revenge, but the documents he had provided, emails, meeting notes, and text messages, corroborated everything he said. By the time he stepped down, the jury's faces told the story. They believed him. They believed all of us. The defense called Deborah to the stand on the second day. It was a gamble, an attempt to humanize her, to let her explain her actions in her own words. It backfired spectacularly. Under cross-examination, the mask that had served her so well for so many years crumbled completely. D.A. Morton asked her about the packages. She claimed she was checking on community property. He asked why she opened them. She said she was verifying contents for security purposes. And he asked why she ran when the die exploded. She had no answer. He asked about the development deal, about Harold's connections to the company, about the timing of the fines and the lawsuit against me. With each question, her composure eroded further, her voice rising, her answers becoming contradictory and desperate. Finally, Morton asked the question that ended everything. Mrs. Whitmore, did you take packages that did not belong to you from the properties of residents who had opposed your decisions as HOA president? She looked at the jury, then at the gallery, then at Harold, who would not meet her eyes, and something broke. Yes, she whispered, but they deserved it. They were ruining everything I built. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Judge Coleman delivered the sentence without ceremony. 2 years probation, $15,000 in restitution to the victims, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent ban from holding any HOA position in the state of Texas. Mrs. Whitmore, the judge said, her voice carrying the weight of everything that had happened. You weaponized a position of community trust for personal gain and petty grievances. You used the system designed to protect homeowners as a tool to harass and victimize them. This court will not tolerate abuse of power masquerading as civic duty. Deborah said nothing. She simply sat there, staring at the table, as the reality of her conviction settled around her like a shroud. The civil suit was settled that same afternoon. Sarah Mitchell had prepared our case so thoroughly that Deborah's attorneys advised immediate resolution to avoid even greater damages. The terms were everything we had asked for, and more. The lien against my property was dismissed with prejudice. $50,000 in damages was paid to me personally, $10,000 to each of the other victims. The HOA board was dissolved, with new elections mandated within 60 days, and Harold's development deal, already dead in practice, was officially terminated, pending an ethics review that would likely end his career in the county. Outside the courthouse, local news cameras waited for statements. I kept mine brief. My parents built that ranch with their own hands. I wasn't going to let anyone take it through lies and theft. I hope this shows people that if you document everything, know your rights, and refuse to give up, the system can work. A reporter asked what I thought about Deborah's sentence. I shook my head. She'll face consequences. That's enough for me. I drove home as the sun began to set, the same route I had driven 1,000 times before. As I passed the Whitmore house, I noticed something new, a for sale sign on the front lawn. Harold's Cadillac gone from the driveway. The empire they had built on intimidation and manipulation was crumbling, one piece at a time. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Danny wants to see the horses this weekend. Can we come by?" I smiled for the first time in what felt like months and typed my reply. "Always." The ranch appeared over the hill, the stable silhouetted against the orange sky, the pasture glowing in the fading light. Home, still standing, still mine. 3 months after the trial, summer settled over the Texas hill country like a warm blanket. I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching Danny chase fireflies across the pasture, while Elena set out plates on the picnic table I had built the week before. The ranch had changed in small ways since everything ended. Not the land itself. That remained exactly as my parents had left it, but the feeling of the place. It was no longer a fortress I defended alone. It had become something else, a gathering point, a place where neighbors stopped by on Sunday afternoons to watch the horses and share stories, and remember that community meant more than bylaws and fines. Mr. Patterson came by most weekends now, sitting in the shade with a glass of sweet tea, telling Danny stories about the old days when this whole area was nothing but farms and open sky. The Hendersons brought their baby, letting her toddle through the grass while their dog played with the horses. Even Tommy Rayburn stopped by occasionally, off duty, bringing beer and conversation and the quiet understanding of 2 men who had been through something together. The new HOA held its first meeting in July, and somehow I found myself elected to the board. I had not wanted it, had specifically asked people not to nominate me, but Elena had given a speech about accountability and fresh starts, and before I knew it, my hand was raised along with everyone else's. The first order of business was repealing the mailbox color requirement. The second was establishing a transparency policy for all board decisions. The third was creating a fund to help elderly residents with home maintenance, named after Mr. Patterson, who had cried when we told him. We met once a month now, in the same community center where Deborah had once held court, but the atmosphere was different. People spoke openly. Disagreements were resolved through discussion rather than intimidation. It was not perfect. Nothing ever is, but it was honest, and honesty was enough. One evening in late August, I drove to the cemetery where my parents were buried. The wildflowers I had planted on their graves the previous spring had bloomed magnificently, purple and yellow and white, exactly the colors my mother had loved. I knelt between their headstones and told them everything: the violation notices, the stolen packages, the blue dye trap, the trial, the verdict. I told them about the neighbors who had become friends, about Danny learning to brush Whiskey's coat, about Elena's laugh echoing across the pasture on summer evenings. I told them the ranch was safe now, that the land they had worked so hard to build would stay in the family for another generation, maybe longer. The sun was setting when I finished, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I touched each headstone once, feeling the warm stone beneath my fingers, and stood up. The drive home took me past the old Whitmore property, now owned by a young family from Austin who had no idea about its history. They had painted the front door red and planted a vegetable garden in the side yard. Children's toys were scattered across the lawn. Life is moving forward, as it always does. I pulled into my driveway as the last light faded, parking beside the gate where so many packages had disappeared, and one very important package had changed everything. The mailbox still stood where my father had placed it 35 years ago, dark blue, exactly as it should be. I walked toward the house, where warm light spilled from the windows, and the sound of laughter drifted across the evening air. Danny's voice is calling for me to come see something. Elena answering. Home, not just a place anymore, but a feeling, something worth protecting, something worth fighting for. I climbed the porch steps and opened the door and stepped into the light. If you believe karma always finds its way, subscribe to Karma Fence and hit that notification bell, because justice never stays hidden for long.